has made it a lot more efficient in terms of the opportunity. But there are certain clauses there which allows other things that can be created. That is the worry. Because if you do that one, then a creative person within government can begin to sort of find ways of for want of a better word, allocating that to preferred people. And that, I mean, and that is where really was the pros and cons in Parliament, actually.
Yeah, that's what we're asking. The place of scrutiny is very key. When we are talking even about Telkom right now, questions are being raised regarding how there is a full circle turn on, the buyback of the Helios, and then now we have a Emirati company here, ICA, and the 60% shares being given to them. There was no any public participation. There was no parliamentary approval on it, and people are wondering, when did it happen? Before we even have the report from the Helios buyback from the parliamentary committee, why would we be quick off the mark to actually sell it off? When did these negotiations happen? So in light of this Privatization Act, then, how then does it really play into such a scenario as Telkom Kenya, right? Let's hear from, and then we come to you.
Yeah.
Because he's in government.
Yeah. A story like that of Telecom then and now is still gets shrouded in mystery, and people are commenting on the change, Helios to the Emirati company and so on, but they are all happening behind the veil, as it were. And sometimes in state operations, those kinds of things might happen, but if there are exceptions to the rule, you can live with it, so to say. But I think the bottom line should be that government, as a public sector entity, should be out of the business.
I don't know why your mic is crackling a lot. I don't know. Yeah, it is crackling. I need just to check it a bit. So okay. Can I just hear from Anthony? Then I'll rectify your mic. Then we'll get back to you. Yeah, your sentiments.
Yeah, so I fully agree with the comments, and the chairman was just about talking about why the philosophy of government being in business. Mm-hmm. If you look at all these 200 plus state agencies, state-owned enterprises, only maybe a handful make money. Mm. Only a handful make sense as business entities. And therefore, I think the philosophy to start with the ones that are making money is because they are attractive to private players. Mm. However, it is also good to mention that the solution, the panacea is not privatization. Mm. The panacea is governance.
It's governance. Yeah.
Because you might say you have a public entity which has a monopoly, which is a bad monopoly, but private monopolies are even worse. So if not done correctly, you move a public monopoly into a private monopoly. Now that is a disaster.
So you're changing the forest and taking the same monkeys in that new forest.
Perhaps, complicating the issue. If you look at KPC, for instance, it has a huge role. It financed line 5 of balance sheet. I think it was 500 million US, off balance sheet. But again, because of some of the decisions that government makes G2G, the fuel that used to come to Kenya, 60% was meant for Kenya and 40% meant for Uganda. Now, because of the current arrangement, Ugandans have cut away 25% through Tanzania. So if you look at the performance of the same organization this year, and maybe perhaps you compare with last year, you will see the comparison. So if you look at, the airports that are owned by state-owned agency, and you go to JKIA, and especially when the flights have come in, only 5 flights. KQ, Air France, KLM, British Airways, Emirates. It's a disaster. And sometimes you hold these enterprises because of sentimental value. Mm-hmm. But if you go to London Heathrow, it's not owned by UK government. You go to most of these international airports, they're not owned by governments. So it needs to be done, but it needs to be done well and proper. Otherwise then we turn into oligarchs like in Russia, what happened in Russia. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hope my mic is working.
It's perfect.
I think what really matters at the end of the day is that the systems are open, they're competitive, to minimize the kinds of deals that people can make out of particularly publicly owned assets, because one can use influence peddling as a way and get to making money and profits from operations that are entirely done by the public sector. So that even profitable institutions might look good, but probably will be operating at a much higher level, even they're operating in a competitive private sector. The issues around monopoly and so on in all economies have to be guarded against because of the risks of having a monopoly. Either way, public or private, has a number of disadvantages on this. I'm glad that finally, and I've not read the final version of the privatization bill, it's been around for a long time, in and out, that finally we have something to work with. And then so that we'll see if there will be issues, obviously, and then you can now deal with amendments on the margin. We have had some, what I think are deadweight kind of positions that have been held, even in Parliament, but also by others, sentimental, let's say for sentimental reasons. Like in the Sugar Belt region, they say, well, you can sell machinery, but you cannot sell our ancestral land, cannot privatize. I mean, it's something that is completely mind-boggling. If you get to a place like Mumias or Sony, these lands were acquired and compensated at the time at a price that was agreeable at the time. But you know, land over time rises in value. So people say, well, you only paid me a pittance, but that might be 40 years ago, 50 years ago. Obviously, it was much smaller than now. And two, so what if you privatize the factory and the new owner wants to do a different array of things that may have a major economic impact as well? So I think we have allowed sentimental reasons to cloud our thinking on these issues. Issues like the port, I see very strong sentiments coming out of Mombasa residents. But actually, strictly speaking, Mombasa residents don't really have a right over the port more than other Kenyans, as it were. If the changes would impact employment levels, for example, which I think should really matter, and if the revenue receiving agencies, it will impact revenue things, that might matter. But it's usually, and look at Mombasa, the pattern of ownership, doing business in the port is completely lopsided. It's benefiting a few families to a great extent, and using government, sort of getting shelter within corners of influence in government to rake in, billions. Let it be made a lot more open and competitive, as it were, even to Kenyans and so on. If you look at how Mombasa economy runs, there are a number of, sort of oligarchic families, you could say, that control it. That's not the kind of thing. That's not how you should run a system. Let me just be open about it, and so on. So they'll make a lot of noise, but I think finally, what does it mean, for example, for revenue generation, what the port might benefit from, for employment opportunities, for the residents of the area, to enable government sort of battle poverty and that kind of thing, rather than shelter a few people. You've seen how over the various administrations we have had, access to operating rights within the port is really murky. It's not something that is an open process, maybe not just in Kenya, maybe in other places as well. But certainly, I think if privatizing is going to put it in hands where the operations are going to be more open, more competitive, that's the way we should go. If privatization is going to come from a government monopoly to private monopoly, that is probably a no-go zone.
So are you also in favor of scrutiny? Even if you're cutting the dead hand of bureaucracy, I think that the place of transparency cannot be...
Yeah, but the law and regulations should require the minimum data that needs to be, the minimum processes and data that must be made open, must be accessible so that people can comment. You can't shroud that in secrecy under the guise that...
Right. Yeah. Could we probe the issue of Telkom Kenya? Because I think that's very murky. We need to understand why. And there seem to be a flash of interest also around UAE lately, so many things from UAE. This one is being given to UAE. It's actually, why the UAE? Will there be the trade imbalance, so to speak?
No, you see,
Why we are focusing? It's not the East now; it's the Middle East.
you see, even in this story of Syrian Bank.
Yes, Syrian Bank as well. Yeah. That's what I'm alluding. Yeah.
What is happening is companies registered in offshore environment. Like this one's in Dubai, which are in the duty-free zones.
Yes.
When you see those kind of companies, it is fair to assume that those probably are companies that have been set up by people from this country. Because if it's a genuine multinational or international company, it would be registered as a business in that country. It would not be a shelf thing in a duty-free zone.
It doesn't even have a website.
They don't have a website. The one that bought our whatever shares in Telkom
60%
is not a company you can find the address if you walk to Dubai. So it creates that suspicion that all this Dubai free, including all these imports you saw of the sugar, the cooking oil, the water, all of those are companies registered in duty free. These are Kenyan companies, Kenyan businesses. I mean, it's not for science. Everybody can see. So and so the trend has always been, when you buy shares, when the government, from the time of Moi, when they privatize companies, they look for the most lucrative ones. Those are the ones the people who control power buy. And that has happened from the time of Moi. So it's not going to be a surprise that in this regime also they'll do the same thing. The most lucrative one will be spinned in such a way that it will go to people who are in power. Through their proxies registered anywhere in this world. It's not a big deal nowadays to register business companies anywhere in the world and come and buy these things. But the fact remains that we are being told that these companies are not performing well, they are inefficient, they are a burden on the exchequer. That is the fact that that's the thing we will need to interrogate and audit. If indeed, yes, you are selling this company because of that, how is it? Show us that in fact you're going to get it better by selling it to Mr. XYZ. I think that's what we're saying. We did KQ, it worked well for some time. Today it's a basket case. We did Mumias, we did all that, but so when you now hear government saying we want to privatize KTN, we want to privatize this, we want to privatize that, and some of these things are not immediate concern because they're not really losing. I mean, they're operating. I mean, you know how KPC works. It's been working efficiently, at least for providing the services that are required. But so I think there is concern in a country where there is trust deficit, where integrity is in short supply. You have to allow Kenyans to doubt some of the actions by the government. And I think this is why when you wake up and suddenly the telephone, the same thing that was under investigation, and Uhuru's team was castigated. That administration was accused of all manner of things regarding that Telkom thing.
Yes.
And then suddenly told, we are going to cancel that thing and government will get it back. A couple of days later, we were told, no, sorry, we have already sold it to some folks.
Yes.
I think, Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not very well versed in this the processes currently of disposing of national assets.
Yeah.
But if you have a situation whereby I am an investor, like say Safaricom and Telkom, Vodacom and Safaricom, yeah, and I want to sell part of my shares to say MTN in South Africa, which is a private company. So this is a private company to company. I'm a shareholder and I'm selling to another private shareholder. That process is not that big in scrutiny compared to if it is held as Telkom by the government and then they have to sell it to a third party. That is subject to a lot more scrutiny. So I mean the current buzz around the streets is that this is a situation whereby in fact give it back to Helios, and therefore you can then do a private sector to private sector deal that is not going to be under big scrutiny. Whereas if you have it done the way it is now, where the shares have already turned back to the treasury, then there will be more scrutiny along that line. All right? And so I think this was a mistiming of information in terms of saying, no, you have to buy it back, and then getting a third party to come in and buy it from there. So I think this whole thing is trying to get it back to Helios so that it can be on a private deal between the investor who is from the Middle East and Helios. And then they sign that deal quietly, and then it's done.
No, you know, that's a very fertile imagination. I mean, these people of Helios were flogged much to Parliament to explain what you did. Remember, just a few months ago, they were flogged much. They were told, explain. They tried to argue that, look, we sold it back to government because the government could not meet some of its obligations. And the government was involved in this or that. They gave reasons why they sold it back to government, and they got their money. Now that is the story under investigation.
The report has not been tabled yet.
The report has not even been tabled. There is an action to be taken on the people who did that. All those people in the former government who did that because it was deemed to be unlawful. Or, to pay 6.9 billion, just a few days before the election. It was deemed to be. So, I mean, before the dust settles on that, we're told, okay, we've sold this thing. You see, even when you sell it on a company, even if it's a company quoted on the stock exchange, when you are selling, you need a CMA approval, isn't it? Yes. Even if I sell my shares out there in London to another party, the CMA has to get approval. And particularly when it's a government thing, again, the scrutiny is more even under the capital markets regulations, guidelines. You have to provide some sort of approval. Treasury has been involved, and it's a process. But this is really unique. I mean, we've never seen something like this. You just wake up and announce that this thing has already been sold by Helios to those guys, and we're not involved. Suddenly now, this process is no longer important. I mean, honestly.
So, what is the place of the standing order? When you have a report has not been tabled, you're actually scrutinizing, a particular firm like Telkom, and still now it goes for sale.
Amazing.
Is it just the preserve of the executive?
The report will not be tabled. I know according to the rules, then the decision to table the report depends on the House Business Committee on whether they find it relevant to table it. And in this case, since the House Business Committee is run by government, they will not table it. And if it's not tabled, it's one of the many reports which have been done but never get tabled in the House. There are many like that.
So the humiliation that John Ngumi went through, the humiliation that everyone went through now is all going down to the tubes.
Correct.
Because we'll want to know the answers as well. Yeah? Indeed. So now we have a new CDN. This we're just focusing on, well, this is away from the privatization bill, but the new CDN bank owners disclosed after Centum sale. And this is where we are talking about the flush of interests, especially with the UAE. And it says here in the Business Daily, the director will just pick it, a combination of local business persons and UAE-based firms have bought 38.91% stake in CDN Bank, edging out Centum from majority control of their tier third lender, or tier 3, filing from the company's registry list, Abcon International LLC, Parkview Investment Limited, and Medilon Trading FZE, all based in United Arab Emirates, as shareholders of Pioneer General Insurance Limited, which takes a 20% stake in the bank. And of course, that's the story of a CDN Bank. You can read all about it in the Business Daily. But just maybe to probe deeply, even as we're talking about privatization, as we're winding up on it as well, we had a very vibrant ICDC, if you may just remember, and the constituents firms that were under ICDC. Maybe you can just give us a bit of history of ICDC through this privatization, or maybe how it has really exchanged hands. There's a very convoluted convoluted path to where, well, let me just give it to you, Bill Okero. You know what I'm asking?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm finding it difficult to ask.
I think the ICDC was set up by the government after independence to provide a vehicle for equity participation to help Africans or local businesses to be set up, by the government providing or participating through equity participation. Many of the people who are very successful in businesses in this country, who have set up in those early years, is through the participation of ICDC. And the later years of Kenyatta, then it became a bit of, it was being misused. That individuals who were very close to power were getting loans and were getting, that kind of thing through ICDC, but not repaying it. And the companies then, those companies in which ICDC had shareholders were being taken over by, being given to those friends of the people who are in power. And so there was a time when ICDC owned shares in literally every other major business in this country. Every other major business, ICDC had a shareholding. And I think when the privatization started in the 90s with President Moi, the government divested from many of these things. And those are some of the companies in which people in power ended up taking those shares, when the government failed to exercise their preemptive rights. One reason or the other, sometimes when they're doing those things is deliberate. But ICDC now, I think, is after the collapse of Chumis and many other of those institutions that they were running, it's been renamed as, I think, Kenya Development Corporation now, isn't it?
No, well, it's called, it's part of what became KDC.
KDC.
Yeah, it was the major,
what became KDC.
Major component. But
the major component.
So the route was coming to you. Unbeknownst to me.
He can't make such an
The value started in
You can pick it up from there.
Ask a question, but you want it to come down the other way.
You can now pick it up from KDC.
So, Debal, what aspect of it did you want?
Bilo was finishing. Bilo was finished.
When it became KDC, then now I said you can take it over.
Yeah, 2 years ago it became KDC.
KDC.
It was the anchor institution, you'd say. But in addition to ICDC, you had the IDB Capital. It was much smaller, but IDB Capital was a fairly well-managed entity for a large part. And then you had the Tourist Finance Corporation that was in the hospitality industry. So those three formed KDC. But certainly ICDC, in terms of what they did, it was, I think, a very exemplary institution. But there were internal workings, of course, that undermined its financial integrity, and power influence was used a lot. But it really made a huge difference in those days. In the 70s, 80s, ICDC was the talk of town, as it were.
Right, thank you. Right, we are just remaining with a few minutes, and I wanted just to tease out what I'd brought before here about the cattle rustling bill that should be coming your way and should be coming for discussions in Parliament, where we have a member of Parliament from Turkana Central, that is James Martin, who's coming up with this particular bill. It says the cattle rustling compensation fund bill that is aiming to, try and compensate the cattle livestock holders who have lost their cattle through rustling. And this is 1.3 billion shillings annually that the Exchequer will be, of course, forking out to make sure they fund this particular bill if it sees the light of day. So if we could just talk about that, we'll begin with you, Bill Okero. Should that really make you happy? Because now, but it is, no, the question that everyone is asking, I'm just saying that with my tongue family and shake, is then why should we, the taxpayer, be paying for the failures of government to, offer security in those particular regions? Because now this will sort of really exacerbate and compound the whole problem, knowing that you will be compensated. So, what happens with the insurance scams, with the life insurance as well, and you have a suspicious lover who knows that you've paid for the life insurance.
It's unlikely that this bill will see the light of the day, but because of there is a government policy by this government, it's one of the things in their manifesto that they'll provide livestock insurance. So that if you lose your livestock in insurance in theft, like in any other asset, then you should be compensated. I think that policy was more premised on drought, mitigation. But I don't see why anybody should think of paying for animals that have been stolen. I think what the government should be focused on is probably engaging the insurance industry and find out how all this livestock can be insured against this kind of risks. But I think but I'm not surprised. I mean, everyone in Parliament, guys who just came out of the woods and ended up in Parliament, suddenly think that money is available, and everyone is coming up with all manner of bills to tax people, and to them. So it's ridiculous. I think there's need for members of Parliament to be inducted properly when they get into Parliament, not just on the standing orders, but really on some of these things and how basic things like even how tax is generated, because this is something that many don't seem to understand what's going on. You just come up and say we need this levy and that levy and this levy and that levy. Yeah, I think it's ridiculous.
Yeah, some of this ludicrous, as you say. There's a senator who's come up also with a bill that needs to extend our weekend, so that at least from Thursday and Friday and Saturday and Sunday we have longer weekends. And we wonder seriously, what sort of legislation is this? What does it really portend? Is it thought through?
But on this livestock thing, I think it will be a tragedy, even if it's finally passed and it's actually implemented, because cattle rustling is a business. I think that has been demonstrated quite clearly.
Yes.
The word cartel is misused, but there are people who are in that line of business, and some of them are in both that line of business, in leadership, and so on and so forth. Who caused this to happen? And I think for that to be introduced, it would just be extremely unfortunate. I think after some time, it will take time for that bill to pass through Parliament. Private bills take a long time. And he's doing that for his own home audience, must be.
So this is for political experience.
Yes, but if it passes and it's a law, and it could be implemented, doesn't have to be, but could be implemented. And I don't know if it will be assented to anyway. Probably there would be some presidential reservation, then it will fail at that point, because you can't really easily overcome a presidential reservation. You need 2/3 majority, and that's usually very difficult to marshal, and so on. There already are instruments, market-related instruments on the market. I know there is, for example, one project supported by the World Bank, implemented in part by KDC as well, but there are others, in which insurance for private sector insurance for cattle, for livestock, is part of it. These are risks that should not be borne by government, as it were. So if that bill were passed, they wanted the Turkana Central MP, I think it would be providing added incentives for rustling to occur. You gain as you sell, you the organizer and so on and so forth, and you gain as the losses occur among your people. And I think it's just going to be a circus. I don't think it will go very. I agree with Bill Okera. I doubt that it will see the light of day.
Right. Let's hear from Anthony.
I concur. I mean, rustling is a way of life in some places, and so the cattle that appear in one place, when they'll go back and they come back and they keep going backwards and forwards, I'll make money. I don't have to do very much. Just rustle and continue. The same cows move from one place to another, and money is being paid out. It's just no way it's going to see the day of light. I think it's probably mischievous to bring this kind of thing, but again, tongue-in-cheek, sometimes you have to be seen to be active in Parliament. It's a good way of being seen to be active.
Representation.
You don't want to be listed in the Mzalendo list.
But I think if you look at from the electorates of the Turkana Central point of view, perhaps the Member of Parliament has a point, because it's a failure of the system to protect the citizens in that constituency or in that region. So the only way he thinks that can solve this is to compensate, because we've agreed that we have to allow this to happen. cattle rustling and the business, as the chairman has said, it will happen. So why then don't we get some proceeds of the people selling meat in Nairobi, the biggest meat market, to compensate? You know, so it points to a failure in the system, but to guarantee. And I think the state has a cardinal role to protect lives and property. So in the absence of that, members of parliament will come with something to protect the people who elect them.
Indeed. But you know, some obvious things, so to come back again, very quick one, things like X thousand head of cattle or livestock are stolen, moved probably 100 kilometers from inside Kenya into Uganda. You know how quickly livestock, you're moving 2,000 livestock, how fast you can move on foot. And you know, nobody can track them, nobody can see them, and so on. This is a highly managed scheme, so to say. Government should crack on the criminality elements of it to start with. And I'm glad that, that there are attempts to do that. Many years ago, in the 50s, up to the 60s, those problems were in Maas Island. It's now, I can say, virtually, you know, it's completely gone. I'm sure there's still cattle stealing, even in my part. There's still some cattle stealing here and there, but it's not a way of life, it's not a major thing.
Indeed.
I just hope that it will be stamped out in those areas as well.
Thank you. Right. I just wanted to end up with Bill Okero, and then we get to our closing remarks here. Bill has a story that I remember he told us about a sheep and a goat. And even as we have those shots on air, I want you to just speak about the sheep. And I think it really adds and connects with the quote of the day.
The quote of the day. If you show that quote of the day, that's exactly what it is.
You can just remind us those particular, yes.
That you can work very hard in silence. and you know, so the pastoralists have this, you know, those who keep the sheep and the goats, you know, the ram, when it's betting at night in the boma, it's very quiet.
Yes.
But it can met with 100 and you know, very effective. The he goat will be making noise, you can't sleep the whole night, pop, 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 the whole night. But at the end of the day, zero work done. So you can make all the noise, but the question is, you can work more effectively in silence. This is you know, we use it normally when there's one to talk to you and tell you, look, my friends, you kupiga mdomo, fanya kazi.
Yeah. So be the he goat or the sheep. Yeah. The ram that's actually here. The silence is working hard.
You work the ram way.
Let's get to closing remarks. Patrick, about 30 seconds.
No, I think for what we discussed today, I think we just need, we need to focus as a country and really get our policies right, get our direction right, and do what the current president and the previous president said. We really need to just do what we have said we're going to do as a country and get ourselves out of these financial.
All right.
Yeah, I think it's time we got some deep thinking about who are the winners, who are the losers in all this complex architecture of public policies that have come into play. I'm sure there are some good tidings, and there are areas that should be allowed to wind down and probably disappear, even if they add to the list of uncertainties. But our political noises have been too loud now, and they are crowding out everybody else. Even when there are important issues to be raised, such as some of those we have discussed around this table.
Thank you. Right. So appearance today in Parliament,
yes,
Kenya Association.
So I'll be, brief. I think the public policy space, and Kenya is fairly a complex economy. So any decision that is made, you need to have a 360-degree view. And that's why there's importance of public-private dialogue, structured. Solutions are there. We know what needs to be done. We just need to get together and do it. And if we don't do it, I just worry about the millions of kids who join the labor market every day. Millions. If we don't do it, then the outcome is only one. We're headed to a train crash. But you can change the tide. And we have a lot of expertise in this country.
Indeed, indeed. Bill Okero, finally.
Yeah, I think just in relation to that, the national dialogue, Kenyans are a bit apprehensive about what would come out of this meeting as these guys round up their dialogue. But I think of greatest concern is that the government will not put Kenyans in this hard economic time. They will not put us through a referendum or some of those things that would really make life, again, much more difficult and much more expensive in a country where already people are struggling with the economy. And I think government, you know, the bureaucrats need to read what's going on, read what's happening on the ground. There's always a risk that people in power are not in touch with the reality. And this is the risk that I think this government, like the previous one, will fall into unless they really find out what is happening and try to address issues.
Indeed. Thank you very much. And the question is the center speaking to the periphery? Is the center speaking to the periphery? That is what Bill Okero is saying. Let them listen in to what is happening on the ground as well. Gentlemen, I really appreciate your input this morning. We'll leave you with a quote of the day. And of course, also remembering that particular story of Bill Okero. Work hard in silence. Let your success be your noise. Right? Let your success be your noise. Don't toot your horn on. Have a good day. You've been watching Sokoni here on Morning Prime. His diary is up next.